Hello, namaskar. Welcome to my pod, the CAA Show. CAA, as all of you know, is Conversations and Analysis. My name is Juggi Bhasin. To become a subscriber, all you have to do is to press that red button on your screen. Subscription is, of course, completely free. There is something very unique about the Delhi bombing. There is something which I would call one of the most defining moments in India's fight against terrorism about the Delhi bombing, which puts it in a totally separate category as compared to other terrorist attacks in India. And you would be asking what particularly that thing would be. It's not so much the number of casualties, which is, of course, very, very tragic. More people have been killed in terrorist attacks in India in previous terrorist attacks. It's not the number of casualties. It's not even the role, I would say, of external forces, which I'm going to talk about a little later in this podcast. There is something else about this particular bombing. uh, Somebody would call it a suicide attack or a suicide terrorist attack that has completely put us on the edge. It has put the whole country, actually, in a sense, on the edge. uh, we are thinking about it, we are disturbed about it, we are looking for answers. The answers do not simply lie in the fact that, of course, this has been aided and abetted by the external aggressor, which, of course, happens to be Pakistan, and maybe some people are even saying Bangladesh. That, of course, could be true. But there is something beyond that. And let me amplify, let me put forward that particular question, which is rankling in our minds. And that question we are all asking is that how come these bombers were radicalized to such an extent? These were our own people. And therefore, we are searching for answers from within. This was the enemy within. This was the war that they were carrying out within. How come they were radicalized to such an extent? And the obvious question which we need to ask is that who radicalized them to that extent? And let's not just give pat answers that it was Pakistan. Of course, Pakistan is aiding and abetting these people. That's not the point at all. But there is something beyond that. And I think in this podcast, I will try and understand, I will try and maybe put a finger on what could really be the reason that these people are radicalized to that extent. This is the most important question we need to answer in this terrorist attack incident. So let's keep that in mind, because this is the question which is disturbing all of us. It is giving sleepless nights to our intelligence agencies, and the threat is real. It's now very, very clear that the threat maybe has subsided for the moment, but it hasn't passed. How many of these terror cells, how many of these internal enemies are still there? There may be now, they have gone comatose for the moment. They are lying in wait, waiting for the right opportune moment to emerge. How successful our intelligence agencies will be. These are all questions which are swirling out there after this brutal attack which happened at near Red Fort. But again, it comes back to that. Again, that central question which I'm asking is that who is responsible for radicalizing these people? Because at the end of the day, whether you like it or not, these were our people. हिंदी में जिसे कहते हैं मेरे अपने, ये हमारे लोग थे. Or who has radicalized them? That's the question which I'm going to ask in this particular podcast. Now let's get something out of the way before I come to the main crux of this podcast. Of course, Pakistan is completely responsible. Now, whether Pakistan means it is the Jaish, or whether it is the Lashkar-e-Taiba, or whether it is the ISI, whether it is that failed marshal of Pakistan, Asim Munir, and his machinations and all his doings, separately or combined or whatever, that is something which even a child in this country knows that these people are responsible. There is no doubt in anybody's mind that who is responsible. Maybe this time even Bangladesh, because we know we have a very unfriendly government in Bangladesh. Look at what the death sentence they passed on Sheikh Hasina, and they are trying to corner India in the process. These are the obvious people we know who are aiding and abetting. the problem for us all the time. That does, of course, does not beggar the imagination. We know about this. But there is, as I said, it is something much, much more beyond this. And what is this? And let me start by giving you a very, very interesting example, and then I will lead on to explain to you that who could really be responsible for radicalizing these bombers. Take your mind back, and among the younger audience, I would. Let me explain this to you. That maybe in the 60s and then the 70s and the 80s, I would say even in the 90s, actually. If you look at our second largest community in India, that is the Indian Muslims, and the Indian Muslims, in terms of, I'm just taking an interesting example in terms of attire. Um, you could not distinguish between, let's say, a man or a woman on the street from they would be like all of us. But something changed after, I would say, maybe the fall of the Babri Masjid, sure. Maybe in the mid 90s, in the late 80s, I would say, where more and more people started, the women folk started, Muslim women folk started wearing the burqa. And the question which I'm asking is this, that, as I said, in the past decades also, the Muslim population in India was certainly one of the largest in the world. And then it became apparent that more and more were taking to this, the Islamic attire, the Islamic version of wearing the burqa and traditional wear. Uh, and the question which I'm asking is that how come that so many people in India were suddenly influenced by this pan Islamic thing, which was happening in West Asia, which was happening in Iran, which was happening in some of the Muslim countries. Why I'm asking this question is because, considering the size of the Muslim population in India, shouldn't they have been influencing by their liberalism and assimilation in Indian society to West Asia rather than the other way around? Why were our Muslim brothers and sisters being influenced by the Islamic traditions, by the, some would even say, the Qattar, that's the Hindi word which I'm looking for, uh, Islamic traditions coming, which are being imported from West Asia, from the Middle East into India. And the reason and the answer is probably lies and will give us an explanation to the current problem which we are facing of the radicalization in maybe a very small minority, very small percentage of the Muslim population within India, but that will give us the answer. And the answer to that lies is in this, within quotes, the secular Indian politician who actually enabled this. That's right. I'll repeat this again. The secular Indian politician was primarily responsible for this trend where it actually, in a certain way, almost pushed the Muslim population in India towards adapting and adopting these hard line Islamic practices coming in from the Middle East and from West Asia. Excuse me. It should have been the other way around because of the size, the liberalism, the the easy assimilation between Hindus and Muslims and Sikhs in India and Christians. It should have been the other way around, that the Indian Muslims should have been probably influencing a liberalism maybe in these countries, but it was the opposite. It also meant another thing, that the center of the Muslim, ordinary Muslims world, the center of the Islamic world was not India, but it was the Middle East, it was West Asia. Like, it was almost like everybody was looking towards that side to say that, yes, whatever, the strictures or whatever the teachings or whether all that the West Asia or Middle East had to offer had to be adopted in India. And I'll tell you why I hold the secular Indian politician, the so-called secular Indian politician, culpable for this trend, which actually is now metasizing, I would say, into these problems which we are facing of the hardcore radicalization of a section of the Muslim community. And that being the case because, if you remember, way back, way back, the previous regimes in our country, they encouraged people to look outside. That's what they were doing. The secular Indian politician, he has this narrative is not 10 or 12 years old, as some people think of the present regime of the secular politician. This narrative of Muslims being at the bottom of society, of being discriminated against, of their religious practices being threatened, of being discriminated by the majority community. This narrative has been on and on, has been running on and on by the secular Indian politicians way back. It's been continuing in 70s, 80s, 90s, because when the secular, so-called secular state in India failed to give any tangible benefits to this minority population, then they hit upon this victimization card that you are being victimized by the majority community, by these so called hardline Hindu outfits, by Hindutva. All that narration became a handy excuse of the secular politician to keep grilling, to keep reaching out to the Muslim population that no, you are discriminated against, that you are victimized, and these people are out for you. And even today, the liberal politician, the liberal intellectual, all this ecosystem, they keep hammering this particular theory, this particular thing that you are discriminated against by the majority politicians, by the majority community, and therefore it is absolutely okay, it is absolutely kosher for you to look towards the Middle East, to look towards Iran, to look towards West Asia, where you can be inspired from, because there is nothing to inspire you within India. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the root cause of the present radicalization. Because this grilling, this inculcation, there is an English word called didactic, which means intention to treat, that you are victimized, you are victimized, you are victimized, you are discriminated against. This narration has been going on, as I said, for decades and decades now. And the secular Indian politician and the secular intellectual in India, and weights and words matter, they have been going on with this narration, and it has affected the people, the Muslim population in India, and certainly more in Kashmir. Because look at it in a very, very pragmatic sense. Compare the per capita income or the lifestyle of the ordinary Kashmiri Muslim, our side, the Kashmiri Muslim, as compared to the one, let's say, in POK, in Pakistan occupied Kashmir. There is no comparison. I mean, the per capita income of the Kashmiri Muslim would be 10 times more than that of the POK Muslim. Not only that, the per capita income of the Kashmiri Muslim is actually higher than even that per capita income of the ordinary Muslim within the hinterland, within India also. So there is no reason actually for the Kashmiri Muslim actually to feel discriminated against, or to feel that he has been left out in an economic sense. But it is the narrative, narrative of the Kashmiri politicians. It is the narrative of the secular politicians within India that has been going on and on and on, grilling into their heads that you are discriminated against and all this. And I'm not saying that they have been pushing people into deliberate terrorism. But what I'm arguing is that this is the soft path where it leads eventually to hardline terrorism. Because once a child or a person, he gets this kind of tutelage, this kind of indoctrination keeps coming at him. You keep throwing this kind of indoctrination at him that you are a second class citizen, which is what the secular politician in India has been saying. Then these people, they grow up, they become radicalized, and then they look for options. to redress their so-called grievances. And what are the options? Then the options are to take to terrorism, and then you have the enemy, external enemy, waiting outside in the wings, which is Pakistan. And now that we know that even in the east, Bangladesh, these kind of people are always waiting out there to radicalize you even further. And therefore, then the Jaish, the Mujahideen, the Indian Mujahideen, earlier that was in Kashmir, then the Lashkar, then the ISI certainly, which is, of course, coordinates the activity of all these radical, all these terrorist outfits. Then they come into operation. Then they target these people, whether in groups or in singles. They radicalize them to that extent. And then maybe out of 100 people, there are 5 people who are so badly radicalized that they are prepared to carry out terrorist attacks in India. They're prepared to do suicide bombings in India. That's the path. That is the journey of radicalization. But it all starts, as I'm arguing, it all starts from the secular politician, that he goes on and on grilling into the head of the I would say the blank slate, literally, of impressionable young minds in the Muslim population, that you are victimized, you are discriminated against. That is the real problem. And the second problem, which comes along with this, the second problem really also is that why has the Indian state, including the president government, why do we allow these religious universities, this Al Falah University? Evidently, now there are reports coming in, and I don't know how far they are true, that acres and acres of this land were given by the Qatar government. I don't know how far that is true, to this religious university. No effort was made to check as to what you were doing, what kind of people were being recruited. There was no accountability, because all these religious based outlets, they all eventually end up in this acute minoritism. Acute minoritism, of course, is another word for victimization. That since we are victimized, since the Indian state should be held accountable for discriminating against the minority, and therefore this feeling of guilt which has to be addressed. The previous regimes were addressing this feeling of guilt by giving largesse, by giving all these SOPs, by these religious so-called religious universities, that okay, you can set up an Al Falah university, you can set up your jamias and this and that, religious based universities, and therefore you get certain quotas and etc. and all those kind of things in these religion based universities. But even this present regime in India, it has also been carrying on with the same system, which is, it confounds the mind to my mind. Why should you allow this religious based minoritism? Why don't you let the Muslim population liberally assimilate and assemble with the rest of the people in this country? Why do you allow all these things? Because the moment you set up these religion based universities, you have a problem in your hand, because you are giving the official seal or approval on a acute minoritism. Acute minoritism then leads to these people looking outside India into benefactors, into higher powers. Oh, we will get our directions, we will get our tutelage, we will get what to wear, what to eat, what to drink, how to assimilate with other communities from Middle East, from West Asia, from maybe even Pakistan. That's the problem. And that is why I'm saying these religious based educational institutions should actually be banned immediately. When a secular politician talks of secularism in terms of communication, in terms of education, then this is the first step, ladies and gentlemen. Make the university secular, genuinely secular. Stop this religious based universities. These are the problem. As it is, we are dealing with the problems of radicalization in the madrasas. And on top of that, you allow these universities, whether they are technical colleges or medical colleges or engineering colleges or general colleges, it's all the same. Now we have seen, nobody could imagine that doctors would be so radicalized. The same doctor who probably is performing a surgery on you in the morning and in the evening is plotting to actually kill the same person. I mean, Where does it happen? But it only happens in India because we are woolly eyed, because the Indian state, and generally I'm not talking of this particular regime or the past regimes only, the Indian state feels guilty in giving these sops to minorities to address some kind of a guilt. What guilt? The Muslims in India stayed behind because of their own volition, because they chose to do that. And we welcome that. We all welcome that. Let them assimilate naturally and freely without these encumbrances, without this minoritism tag, without this dress attire, without these, this entire madrasa kind of education, which is in some argue no education really. Why do you allow all that? That's the real nub of the problem, ladies and gentlemen. That, to mine, is the real radicalization. We can keep looking for scapegoats. We can keep looking to address the external enemy, which is Pakistan. And Pakistan, by the way, just to add a note on it, we can fix Pakistan whenever we want. And however you might strike Pakistan or carry out surgical strikes or whatever, Pakistan is not going to change. Even if they are down with a begging bowl and in tatters, even then they will carry out terrorist attacks. That's the nature of Pakistan. We know that. But we have to address the problems within. We have to take into cognizance the enemy within. And I'm repeating, this is a very, very important statement which I'm making, is not your minority community, is not the Indian Muslim. It is the secular politician, it is the secular intellectual who is paving the way for this community to be radicalized. And therefore, people also the right to need to be very careful, because I have seen a lot of podcasts, whatever, where people are giving calls that the Muslim population in this country has to be kept under check, they have to be kept under surveillance, and all this rubbish and nonsense. That is not the solution. I'm sorry, I don't agree with that. uh, they are all our brothers and sisters. They need to be assimilated in the normal way with the rest of the population. That is the solution. And you have to stop giving these minoritism sops, these privileges of religion. That needs to stop as of today, not even as of yesterday, I would say. That should be the priority. And maybe bring in laws. That's my other suggestion. Maybe bring in laws where people who encourage this kind of ghettoization, who encourage this kind of victimization, who encourage this negativism in communities, the law should take its course. The law should crack down on such people. I think that the time has come for that. But that should be on these so-called politicians, not on the Muslim population. That is not no solution at all. And therefore, I like to end this podcast by by on a note of caution, really, because we are at, in a certain sense, in terms of community relations, in terms of India, we are at a kind of a crossroads. Yes, we have scalped the enemy, the external enemy, Pakistan, and we will do it again. I'm sure Operation Sindhu 2.0 is in the works. We'll probably, at some point or the other, we'll even scalp Bangladesh also. We can do that very successfully. That's not an issue or a problem. But we have to be very, very careful of the enemy within. हिंदी में जिसे कहते हैं, इस जहर को पनपने मत दो. Don't let it fester. Don't let it grow. And the people, last time I'm saying again and again, that the people responsible for that is the secular, so-called secular politician and intellectual in India. They are doing a huge disservice to the country. That needs to be stopped. That needs to be curtailed. That kind of ideology of these politicians needs to be stopped in its tracks. And so, on this note, I come to the end of this podcast. I hope you really like the show. You do like the show, then subscribe to the CAA Show. And in this note, it's goodbye and cheers from my end.